And then, of course, there's the bit that probably relates more than any other to you all as archivists. And that is that the city would be the repository through these institutions, including the National Archives, of many of the national records of every Australian paper and book that signposted Australia's complex and morally fraught road through nationhood, the good, the bad and the ugly. A lot of it's here. It's often forgotten, of course, that a city with suburbs where people lived and built tight communities that emerged as part of this city too, as part of the capital. Those who make no attempt to grasp or who simply reject the notion of investing in the capital are often contemptuous of the city that also serves the people that serve the capital. Bashing Canberra has been a national pastime since 1913. Some of it's done lightheartedly, fair enough, some of we do it here too. Some of it's done naively, and sometimes it's done with a mixture of genuine contempt and utterly willful ignorance, I think. Long before I contemplated the remote possibility that I would ever write a book called Canberra, I was living in London on a 3-year posting away from my home here in this city, which I just really come to love, having moved from Melbourne about 10 years earlier. The fires came here when I was away and destroyed 500 homes, killed four people. I watched the city burn on television in London, feeling absolutely helpless and feeling like I really should be here and feeling for the first time that this was actually my home. I've never been instinctively, reflexively protective of Canberra, but I had a visceral reaction when I read what a columnist called P.P. McGuinness, then writing for the Sydney Morning Herald, a paper for which I was working in London at the time, along with the Melbourne Age, wrote in the aftermath of the fires. I'll just read you a little of it. Is it too much to hope that the bushfires in Canberra will lead to a rethink of the role of Canberra in our national life? The development policies which have so systematically turned the bush capital into a fire trap. Clearly the bushfire disaster has to be sourced in mistaken policy. The creation of Canberra as a supposedly well-planned green city, or rather a collection of suburbs amongst bush and pine plantations, was always misconceived. The best thing that can be done now after the victims of the fires are helped to rebuild their lives, although the uninsured should have to bear the cost of their own folly, is to abolish the ACT as it exists, pare it back to essentials and let most of its citizens lead normal lives within the ACT. I still wonder what McGuinness regarded as essential and normal, but it didn't accord with what I did. Now a little bit about my contact with the archives, the various archives in Canberra, because they're such an important part of my life these days. As a full-time journalist, until about 6 years ago, I saw fulfilment in all sorts of detailed investigations on highlighting the abuse of power, in interviewing the famous and the intriguing and too often going to dangerous places. And then I became pretty much a full-time author who does some journalism on the side. I'm not a historian, but all of my non-fiction books have strongly historical narratives. It was when I was researching the first of those books, Bathsheba, that was mentioned before, that I discovered the great allure and the challenge and the absolute excitement of delving into the archives across the institutions here in Canberra, in Melbourne and Queensland, and in London and Israel too. As a journalist who had been addicted to the chase and to the quick information fix, I found myself in my new life suddenly relishing digging into the files of the War Memorial, the National Library, the National Archives and elsewhere. I found, as I still find, the anticipation of opening a new box of files and reaching into an envelope within that I know hasn't been looked at by another researcher for decades absolutely thrilling. Some of my former colleagues will never understand that. They think I should get out more, but I find the thrill of discovering a document, and I know researchers such as myself don't really discover the documents. You people discover the documents, but I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. I really find that process absolutely thrilling. A diary, for example, that tells a special story, or the record of a secret military investigation into the misdemeanours of Australian troops in World War I, for example. When I find something exciting, I have to tell someone. I have to ring a mate and say, you'll never guess what I've come across. And I like to impart to the readers of my book the delight that I take in that discovery too. The great cliche, of course, is that archives are dusty and musty places, you know, dank and dark, and that archivists are some sort of weird underground breed who kind of live in that dust. Nobody ever writes in fiction or in the newspapers about the spotlessly clean, perfectly organised archives. But that, in my experience, is absolutely the case. And I have you people here to thank for that, but I have more to thank you for that. I have to thank you for your dedication in procuring, restoring, ordering, conserving and preserving the records that comprise this nation and indeed other nations' memories, so that amateurs like myself can come and tell the stories. You're at the front line of discovery and realisation, and that's an exciting place to be and an important place to be. So I can only imagine how very trying it must be for you at times when the storytellers do not do service to the material that you procure, intend and make sense of before others. Which brings me to the wonderful book that we're here to launch, Ted Ling's book. It's fantastic. I've been wading through it over the last couple of evenings, and there's a great deal of fantastic material. Ted has a strong sense of narrative, but it's also a beautifully ordered book. I just wish it was in existence when I wrote my own book, Canberra, because it would have saved me months and months of research, and I would have credited it to Ted, I promise. I think this book is the story of Canberra as it exists in the government archives. It's a remarkable work of great diligence and discipline by Ted, who dedicated 31 years of his professional life to the National Archives. I think it's enormously telling that when Ted retired in 2006, he didn't really retire at all. He went on to do a PhD on the Northern Territory's pastoral industry before going on to write another similar guide about the Commonwealth records regarding to the Northern Territory, which is what really loud and a lot of people have been talking about that tonight too. It's an incredibly lucid work, clearly conceived, planned and executed. It's literally the guide to the whereabouts of so many critical municipal stories about Canberra according to government records. I can open the book on almost any page and be led to a story, be it about the correspondence surrounding the Canberra Casino, the proposed Jervis Bay nuclear power station. I didn't know about that, but that's a cracking story. The paddle steamer on the lake, or the Golden Jubilee in 1963. Congratulations, Ted. This book is a wonderful achievement and a very generous gift to Canberra in its centenary year. With that, I'd like to officially launch government records about the Australian Capital Territory and ask you to congratulate Ted. And I'd also like to say thank you for listening to me and for asking me to be here this afternoon. Michael, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and as Michael Piggott wrote in his introduction to the conference, I hope you get to have a look around the city, but especially this very important part of the city in the parliamentary triangle, important to the nation and important to the nation's story. I'd reiterate Michael's suggestion that you experience the National Gallery's Aboriginal memorial that commemorates the Indigenous people who died defending their lands post-1788. For that is a part, though not nearly a well enough told part, of the Australian story, and the place to tell it is here in Canberra. Thank you very much.
I'd rather a ball of yarn.